The question of whether Nigel Farage was actually thinking about a return to frontline politics 6 months before that then does bring in the time frame of that gift, does bring in those sort of timelines, and actually creates more questions over, well, you might not have been actively running for a seat, but it's quite clear, even out of your own mouth, that 6 months prior you were considering a return to frontline politics.
Let me just first mention this, that the police, of course, are now reported to be investigating a donation made to Reform's Robert Jenrick. He is, of course, a big player in the Reform camp on their lineup of senior spokesman. It's about his campaign to become Conservative leader in 2024. We'll hear more about that in just a second. And meanwhile, there are fresh questions about Nigel Farage and his £5 million gift from the cryptocurrency billionaire Christopher Harborne, more particularly the timing around all of that. Let's talk to Ollie Cole, Times Radio's newsroom reporter. Good to see you, Ollie.
Hi, John.
Should we start with the questions reported in the Times about the £5 million gift to Nigel Farage, and in particular the timing around that?
Yeah, exactly. So this is interesting. This is sort of an old video at the launch of Nigel Farage's Clacton campaign, June the 3rd, 2024, which feels sort of like a political lifetime ago now. But someone unearthed it, and we were looking at it, and what's really interesting about it is there's a question asked by a Guardian journalist at the back of the room about whether the person who was standing at the time, a man named Tony Mack, who ended up having quite a lot of beef with Nigel Farage and has actually ended up being part of Ben Habib's Advance UK's sort of splinter group in Clacton, and actually ran as an independent against Nigel Farage in 2024. But basically the question was, is this the moment where Tony Mack, the man currently Reform's candidate in Clacton, is finding out that you want to stand, or did he know already? Now, Nigel Farage, in response to that question, and it probably, it was sort of flippant and off the cuff by Nigel Farage, who sort of yawned and groaned in the lead up to answering it. And at the time, it was, a fairly offhand comment. But when you look back at that video, it does raise some interesting questions, because Nigel Farage said that actually the Reform candidate he replaced had known 6 months ago that his standing was a possibility. Now, we've heard over the last few days, when it comes to the activity of George Cottrell in terms of giving gifts to Nigel Farage ahead of his election as an MP, and when it comes, as we know, to the £5 million gift from Christopher Harborne, the defence has always been that this is a purely personal gift. And to justify that, we have heard various senior Reform spokespeople taking the airwaves in the last few days saying he wasn't returning to politics, he didn't know whether he was going to be an MP. He, essentially was a social media influencer at the time, has been bandied around. He was, he was the president of the party, he was a majority shareholder, but he wasn't politically active. But actually, the question of whether Nigel Farage was actually thinking about a return to frontline politics 6 months before that then does bring in the time frame of that gift, does bring in those sort of timelines, and actually creates more questions over, well, you might not have been actively running for a seat, but it's quite clear, even out of your own mouth, that 6 months prior you were considering a return to frontline politics. And that's, that just adds to another question along this whole route and routine of questions about when things were granted and why they were granted. It just tags on another question that remains unanswered for Reform and Nigel Farage.
Yeah, and if and when Nigel Farage wins the Clacton by-election and comes back to Westminster, the same Commission of Standards is waiting there, and the same questions are waiting there. So when you say he'll be asking words to this effect, when you tell us that your gift from Christopher Harborne was just one private individual giving money to a friend, another private individual, nothing to do with your political thinking or connections to the party or not, it raises that question. Can that said to be truly the case? Now, meanwhile, swiveling our lens a little bit, you've got Robert Jenrick, who's a big figure in Reform, of course, and the police seemingly investigating donations to him.
Yeah, he. This is a bit strange, because this is back when obviously Robert Jenrick was a Conservative and was running for the Conservative leadership, famously up against Kemi Badenoch to succeed Rishi Sunak, and he got £100,000 almost in donations from a company called The Spot Fitness. Now, that is an overseas funder. It was given by an American businessman, and so there is a question now as to the donation that he receives, because it's against the law for foreign companies, individuals, to donate to UK politicians or parties. And so that question has been raised. There is sourcing from inside the Metropolitan Police that this is being looked into and investigated. Robert Jenrick today has said that he's done nothing wrong. That's the line that he's giving. He says that he's cooperated fully, and his actual reason for taking that donation was that he stood for the leader of the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party itself introduced that donor to him and checked out whether or not the guy was fit to donate. So he's sort of saying, well, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. But he's also saying, I've had no contact from the Metropolitan Police and don't even know that this investigation is going on. But, as you know, John, in order to write something in a newspaper, in order to publish it in this country in particular, you have to have some pretty good sourcing if you are going to make an allegation like that. So it just pulls in this whole, into orbit, not just Nigel Farage now, but, we've had revelations about Richard Tice's tax in the Sunday Times over the last couple of months. We've now got these questions over donations to Robert Jenrick. And so suddenly, Reform UK is day by day having to answer questions about its funding rather than being able to get out its core message.
Right, and again on Clacton, Count Binface, he is drawing enormous attention. Here we are talking about it again, and he won't be the last time we talk about Count Binface, and he's got a lot more attention coming on it, doesn't he? He seems also to be getting a lot of money bet on him to win the Clacton by-election. At the moment, this is an intriguing line of speculation, which is all it can be, but it's getting more intriguing by the day. He's gone down in the betting from being the 250 to 1 rank, way outside it, to being someone who's being cast by the bookies as at least a plausible contester.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting about this is sort of it's become one of those seminal moments in British politics, and what's so fascinating about it is, Count Binface is and has always been a bit of a joke candidate, but he has appeared over the last 24
a bit, but on his head.
Over the last 24 hours, he's appeared on almost every broadcaster, and has received praise for the way he's able to answer questions, things like that. We've got a profile on him going into the Times tomorrow, looking at sort of the electoral history and what he actually stands for. And, Count Binface, in terms of parliamentary elections, has never actually been able to retain his deposit, let alone get a decent smattering of votes. And yet, when you sort of pick yourself up from behind your computer and look a little bit broader as to just what's happening in Westminster or what's happening down in Clacton, there is coverage in the Spanish press. There is coverage in the French press. I was reading a little earlier an article on CNN in America about who Count Binface was, and they've all got sort of localised, translated names for Count Binface in their coverage. And so it's becoming...
Count the Binface.
Yeah, exactly. It's becoming one of those moments. Now, look, if I'm honest, sort of from my, view of elections past and what the situation is in Clacton, I don't think, we are looking at the possibility of an upset, which is what a lot of people are running to the bookies and suggesting. But the interesting thing about it, more so, is actually the more that candidate, the more that Count Binface is in the conversation, the less the conversation is fully about what Nigel Farage wants it to be about, which is in terms of, can I get a mandate from the people of Clacton and can I sock one to the establishment? So the more this goes on, the more sort of mad and balmy this political story looks, and that in itself is a problem for Reform UK.
And, Ollie, of course, the less it looks like Nigel Farage waging a noble crusade against the deep state and the establishment and the media and all of those people who are out to get him, and he wants to recruit the people of Clacton on his side, and the more it looks like a circus.
Yeah, quite. And you look at actually the people who have said the nominations haven't opened yet. We're looking for the first couple of weeks of August, that by-election taking place. But if you look at the people who have said they will stand, it really is, on any other election night, on any other by-election, a list which contains a party leader and frontline politician in the name of Nigel Farage, and a list that you would put down as another. Essentially, they're the also-rans of a lot of elections gone past. A few independents, a few local candidates, some sort of fringe right-wing parties that people haven't really heard of, and, a man with a bin on his head. And so for all of this, it starts to look more and more like a race that actually, whatever the outcome, and if the outcome is, as Reform are pretty confident about, Nigel Farage returning to Parliament, the question at the end of it will be, OK, Nigel Farage, you've won the public support once again in Clacton, but what message are we actually supposed to take from that?
Always a pleasure, Ollie. Let's do it again soon.